Imagine stepping back in time, when kings dined on silver platters and peasants gathered humbly around flickering hearths. Yet, hidden in the shadows of castles and cathedrals, ordinary folk crafted meals so clever, so delicious, they survived centuries. Today, we uncover 15 forgotten medieval recipes that deserve a comeback. Simple, cheap, and timeless dishes that fed entire generations with nothing but grit and creativity. From hearty stews bubbling softly at dawn to herb-packed pancakes sizzling on iron griddles, these meals tell a story not just of hunger, but of survival, community, and flavor. So, before we dive deep into this culinary time capsule, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, so you never miss a journey into history's tastiest secrets. Now, let's step inside the medieval kitchen and begin. As clever as medieval peasants were with traps and natural predators, not every rodent could be caught or killed so easily. Rats and mice were persistent, adaptable, and clever in their own right. This forced peasants to get creative, and sometimes even a little superstitious, in their ongoing struggle. Beyond the obvious, they developed and passed down curious and unconventional methods that blended practicality with folklore. One of the simplest yet most widespread techniques was smoke fumigation. In homes and storage barns, smoke was used not only for preserving meat or keeping insects at bay but also to drive out rodents. Peasants would burn pungent herbs and plants, filling the space with heavy smoke that made it unbearable for rats and mice. Herbs like rosemary, bay leaves, and juniper were favored because of their strong scents. Though smoke did not kill the rodents, it often forced them to flee temporarily. This method was particularly useful after harvest, when peasants cleaned out storage areas before filling them with new grain. In addition to smoke, noise and vibration were occasionally used as deterrents. It was observed that loud or sudden noises could startle rodents and disrupt their nesting habits. Hanging clappers or crude wind chimes in barns and pantries created unpredictable sounds that might discourage rats from settling. Some peasants even trained their children to clap or stomp periodically when working near food stores. Though not foolproof, constant disturbance could make an area less attractive to pests seeking quiet, undisturbed places. Medieval peasants also believed in the power of natural enemies beyond the visible realm. Superstition intertwined with pest control, and charms or talismans were often hung in homes. These ranged from carved symbols meant to ward off evil spirits, which peasants sometimes linked to rodent infestations, to dried animal parts believed to have protective powers. While modern science offers no support for such practices, they provided comfort and a psychological sense of control during difficult times. More grounded in biology were barrier methods aimed at preventing rodents from entering homes and storerooms. Though peasant homes were often simple, some effort was made to seal cracks and holes. Mud, straw, and stone were stuffed into gaps, especially in granaries. Barn doors were fitted tightly, and grain bins were raised above ground level. In wealthier or more organized communities, entire storehouses were constructed with rat-resistant foundations, often stone or brick, in an effort to keep pests out from the start. Another curious but surprisingly practical solution involved mixing ash or lime into floors and around the perimeter of homes. Rats and mice disliked traveling through these abrasive substances, which could irritate their sensitive paws. Peasants also scattered ashes around food stores or poured them into burrows and holes. While not a guaranteed solution, these tactics formed another layer of defense in a peasant's multi-pronged approach. Finally, in desperate cases, communities relied on collective hunts and organized cleanups. Entire villages would coordinate rodent drives, flushing rats and mice from barns, fields, and homes. Using sticks, dogs, and even fire, they attempted to clear infestations en masse. These events, though chaotic, reinforced the communal nature of survival in medieval villages, where every household was affected by the success or failure of pest control efforts. In these varied and often experimental methods, the medieval peasant revealed much about their relationship with nature. They were neither helpless nor resigned. Instead, they adapted, borrowing wisdom from observation, tradition, and even superstition to meet the rodent threat head-on. Their lives demanded resilience, and in their battle against rats and mice, they combined creativity, community, and sheer determination to protect what little they had. Morning gave way to afternoon, and the cycle of labor resumed. The fields beckoned peasants to toil under the indifferent sun, yet the promise of nourishment always lingered, simmering quietly back home. What they lacked in luxury, they compensated for with ingenious simplicity. Their recipes were never extravagant, yet each one told of people who made the very most of what little they possessed. In the cool shadows of stone cottages, leek and herb porridge often awaited weary hands. Leeks, hardy and persistent through seasons others could not endure, became cherished in the medieval garden. Mixed gently into boiling grains and kissed with garden herbs like thyme and sage, the porridge offered warmth and vitality. It was neither feast nor famine, but something in between. Something sustaining. Not every meal had to be hot either. On warmer days, or when fuel for the fire was scarce, peasants turned to more rustic creations. Cheese and small beer bread soup was a clever solution. Stale barley bread, never wasted, found new life in bowls of weak beer, sometimes with shavings of aged cheese. While beer today evokes images of leisure, then it was safer to drink than questionable water. Mixed with softened bread, it became a filling, nutritious brew, sipped slowly while stories were shared. Eggs, when available, were treasured. Chickens roamed freely around farms and cottages, and their offerings became an occasional delicacy. Yet even eggs were stretched wisely. Herb-poached eggs, gently simmered in onion broth or milk and dusted with forage greens, appeared on tables not as indulgence, but as practical nourishment. They were soft, silky, and hinted at elegance without cost. But not all treasures came from the land. The woods and hedgerows often gave gifts to those who knew where to look. Mushrooms, carefully chosen to avoid danger, were prized. Mushroom and barley stew became a staple for the knowledgeable forager. Earthy and savory, mushrooms blended seamlessly with grains to create depth and flavor where meat was absent. Each bite was a reminder of nature's generosity to those with patient eyes. As seasons shifted and cool winds blew across villages, preservation became essential. Salt was expensive, but pickled vegetables, preserved in simple brines of vinegar and herbs, allowed color and taste to survive winter's monotony. Turnips, onions, and even cabbage were transformed from humble roots into tangy companions to the plainer fare. Amid all these creations, there was a quiet reverence for what could be made from seemingly nothing. A peasant's pride was not measured in silver or silk, but in the clever dishes that emerged from necessity. These recipes were not merely food, they were lifelines, imbued with the resilience of those who made them. And so, as the day faded and families gathered once more by flickering firelight, these meals offered more than calories. They delivered comfort. They united communities. They whispered softly that, even in scarcity, life could still be savored, one humble spoonful at a time. As autumn bled into the brittle grasp of winter, the medieval kitchen transformed. It became not just a place of cooking but of strategy. Without modern preservation, creativity was survival. Every scrap, every root, and every leftover became part of the grand puzzle of making food last. What emerged from this necessity were dishes that, centuries later, still feel timeless. The chill air outside made soups and stews essential companions. Among them, cabbage and bean broth was revered. When the soil gave little else, cabbage, sturdy and reliable, held firm. Combined with dried beans that had been carefully stored since harvest, this broth simmered gently through long nights. Each bowl, steaming and fragrant with bay leaves and rosemary, promised strength against the cold. It was rustic, yes, but also deeply comforting, like a warm embrace passed down through generations. Equally cherished was oatcakes, a clever marriage of simplicity and practicality. Oats, often more affordable and easier to grow than wheat, were mixed with water, shaped, and cooked on flat stones or griddles. They were humble but portable, tucked into satchels of shepherds or packed for long journeys. Slathered with fresh cheese or dipped in stews, they stretched meals and filled stomachs, proving once again that medieval cooks wasted nothing. In wealthier manners, pastry might have wrapped meats and spices. But in modest homes, the idea lived on in a simpler cousin, herb and cheese tartlets. These small open-faced pies relied on what was easily gathered. A bit of sour cheese, leftover dough, and handfuls of wild herbs like parsley or dill transformed into golden brown tartlets baked in communal ovens. They may have been modest, but during holy days or gatherings, they felt every bit as celebratory as the feasts of lords. There was joy, too, in sweetness, though sugar was rare and costly. Instead, the countryside offered nature's own sweetener, honey. Honeyed carrots, boiled gently and finished with a slick of golden syrup, made appearances at gatherings and holy festivals. Soft, tender, and glistening, they reminded villagers that even in austerity, a touch of sweetness could grace their lives. These carrots were often the first to vanish from the table, eagerly consumed by children and adults alike. The ingenuity extended even to the forests and fields. Nettle soup, once seen as food of desperation, became revered for its nourishing qualities. Nettles, carefully harvested before flowering to avoid their sting, were cooked down into broths with onions, leeks, or whatever grains were available. The result was silky, mineral-rich, and unexpectedly delicious. It strengthened bodies weary from labor and cured early spring hunger when other crops were yet to mature. Each of these recipes was more than sustenance. They reflected trust in nature's cycles, in family recipes passed by word of mouth, and in the certainty that, even in hardship, taste and nourishment could coexist. The medieval hearth, smoky and flickering, was where resilience simmered quietly alongside dinner. And as fires dimmed and shadows danced upon stone walls, families leaned closer, their bodies warmed by more than food. Every modest dish told a story. Not of kings and battles, but of survival, flavored with wisdom, thrift, and love. Morning after morning, the peasants awoke to the same truth: no feast awaited them. Instead, survival was measured in the steady rhythm of simple meals. Yet, over time, necessity bred not only resilience but ingenuity. What began as modest sustenance evolved into traditions that endured for generations. Among these traditions stood the humble turnip and parsnip mash. Rude vegetables like turnips and parsnips, often maligned for their rough texture and sharp taste, became mainstays of the medieval table. Boiled until tender and mashed together with a splash of milk or broth, they transformed into a creamy, slightly sweet dish. The mash was not merely filler. In seasons when meat was scarce and gardens lay barren, it provided bulk, comfort, and warmth, a gentle balm against hunger. Equally beloved was apple and onion compote, a dish that balanced sweet and savory in an elegant dance. Apples, which kept well into the winter months, mingled with slow-cooked onions to create something unexpectedly refined. Finished with vinegar or verjuice to enhance its tartness, the compote served many roles. It was spooned beside roasted game when fortunes allowed, or more often, spread onto barley bread for a flavorful, filling meal. It reminded diners that food could be more than survival. It could delight the senses, even modestly. Perhaps one of the most resourceful inventions of the medieval cook was chestnut porridge. In forested regions, chestnuts were nature's quiet gift, falling freely and gathered eagerly. Peeled and boiled until soft, then mashed into a thick porridge, chestnuts offered carbohydrates in months when grain supplies dwindled. Mixed with herbs, salt, or a little honey, the dish was creamy, hearty, and filling. To many families, this was the meal that carried them through the leanest days of winter. When spring returned, so too did a flush of greenery. Spring green stew, made from young nettles, dandelion leaves, and tender herbs, marked the joyful return of fresh flavors. Combined with leftover grains or peas and cooked into a gentle broth, it tasted of renewal. Each spoonful signaled the end of winter's grip, an edible celebration of rebirth. Meanwhile, herb pancakes offered a rare opportunity for indulgence. Made with a thin batter of water and flour, then laced with finely chopped herbs like parsley, sage, or marjoram, the pancakes were fried on iron griddles. Crisped at the edges and soft within, they were eaten quickly, often straight from the pan, their fresh herbal notes cutting through the heaviness of stews and porridges. On feast days, a dollop of honey elevated them to almost luxurious heights. By sunset, when the day's labor had ended and shadows grew long across fields and forests, families gathered again. They sat close by the hearth, where flames danced and pots simmered slowly. They did not dine on extravagance. Instead, they tasted wisdom passed down by ancestors who had learned to coax beauty from the barest of ingredients. These dishes, born of limited means, stitched together the medieval year. Root to leaf, orchard to hearth, each meal echoed the same refrain: life may not always offer plenty, but through creativity and care, it could still offer flavor, satisfaction, and above all, connection. The medieval village rested under a blanket of quiet darkness. Inside each modest home, the last embers of the hearth glowed faintly as families finished their evening meals. Though the fare was humble, it was deeply woven into the rhythm of their lives, shaped by the seasons, the harvest, and the wisdom passed quietly from one generation to the next. Among the last cherished dishes of the day, stewed lentils with garlic and herbs stood out for its nourishing simplicity. Lentils, tiny and resilient, were treasured for their ability to endure long storage. Stewed gently with garlic, often grown beside the very cottages that prepared them, and fresh herbs when available, the lentils became silky and flavorful. The dish didn't need extravagance. It was food that gave strength to weary bodies and calmed restless minds. Not every recipe clung to the heavy or hearty. In summer's abundance, there was room for lightness. Cold herb sauce, made from crushed greens like parsley and sorrel blended with vinegar or wine, brightened otherwise heavy meals. Poured over fish or stale bread, it offered a sharp, refreshing note, proof that even simple condiments could elevate the everyday into something memorable. When nights turned long and cold again, comfort returned to the forefront. Spiced pears, a rare sweet, emerged during festive gatherings. Though sugar was often a luxury reserved for nobility, the countryside had its own traditions. Pears, poached slowly with wine, vinegar, and warming spices like cloves or cinnamon when obtainable, created a luscious, tender dish. Shared on feast days, spiced pears embodied celebration without opulence. They were sweet enough to remind villagers that even harsh winters held moments of joy. Even the scraps of yesterday's bread found new purpose. Bread pudding, an ingenious way to avoid waste, came to life as stale loaves soaked in milk or ale, mixed with eggs if available, and baked near the hearth. The result was filling and tender, a dish that spoke of thrift and gratitude in equal measure. Through these recipes, medieval people quietly mastered the art of enough. They could not control poor harvests or feudal burdens, yet they crafted dishes that transcended mere necessity. Each bowl, each bite, was rooted in respect for the land, for the labor that brought ingredients to the table, and for the community they shared it with. Centuries later, their lessons linger. In a world now overflowing with abundance and convenience, the flavors of the medieval hearth call softly from the past. They remind us that true cooking does not begin with endless choices, but with care and creativity. They whisper that simple ingredients, combined with patience and love, can create meals worth remembering. Perhaps, if we listen closely enough, we will hear them urging us to return, to revive these forgotten recipes not as relics, but as guides. Guides that lead us back to the table, where food and connection, as they once did long ago, nourish far more than just our hunger. And there you have it. 15 humble, yet extraordinary dishes that once kept medieval families alive, and could still bring warmth and simplicity back to our modern tables today. In every spoonful of pottage, every slice of barley bread, and every herb-infused tartlet, there's a lesson. A reminder that food does not have to be complicated to be comforting. Sometimes, the oldest recipes carry the deepest wisdom. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow history lovers. And tell us, which of these medieval recipes would you love to try today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious, and stay hungry for history.